Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. This is the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. If you are new here, you're joining us right at the end of a three-part series on improving your listening skills in a foreign language. So, if this is your first episode, well, welcome. You might like to go back 2 episodes, though. So episode 223, because that will, today will make a lot more sense if you've listened to the first 2 parts of the series. But if you have been listening to the series so far, then I hope you've been enjoying it. Today we're going to wrap it up with part 3, which is all about the fact that real conversations are nothing like your textbook. So in part 1, we talked about the fact that people speak too fast and why actually speed is not the real issue when you struggle with listening. In part 2, we talked about the fact that you can't tell words apart in fast speech. So sometimes you get 4 or 5 words that sound like one word because they're said so quickly. And we looked at why that happens. In this part, we are talking about the fact that, you spend all this time studying in a class or with a teacher, but then you get out into the real world and suddenly everything is far too hard for you, and it's nothing like what you thought the language was like when you were studying in the classroom. Does that sound familiar? I'm sure it does. It happens to me all the time. So let's get into part 3 of the conversation. Remember, if you would like to watch this on video instead of audio, then I recommend you do so because there are lots of visuals that help you kind of understand the concepts that I'm talking about. If you'd like to watch the video instead of listening to the podcast, then you can go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 225. All right then. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to the series, 3 Steps to Better Listening Skills. We are in part 3 already. It's really flown by. I hope you've enjoyed the first 2 videos. Today in part 3, what we're going to be doing is tying everything together and ending with some specific recommendations for how to start the process of improving your listening skills and seeing real results in the next 90 days or less. So a quick recap then. In part 1, we talked about the basic problem as we often perceive it of people talking too fast. We looked at how successful listening is a lot more than that in reality, and that most beginner material that we use shields you from the reality of spoken language. The solution to this is to allow yourself to learn real language and move away from this approach of learning in building block style ways. In part 2 then, we said, okay, well, I want to go off and listen to more natural language, but I can't tell words apart. They all sound the same. Well, connected speech is what happens when you speak quickly. Words change, sounds change, they transform in order to help you speak more fluidly. And the reason that you struggle to hear words apart is because you're simply not used to it. And so the solution is to listen to natural language and use transcripts to fill in the gaps so that every time you struggle to hear something, you can see exactly what it's supposed to be in the transcript, and this helps you realize your weaknesses and improve them systematically. So far so good. You think to yourself, okay, I need to listen to more natural language, I get that, and I need to use transcripts. Good, I get that. So that I can start to get used to all this connected speech, learn how words change, move away from this building block approach. I get this. So you ditch your textbook and you start listening to real language from conversations, from movies, from the radio, from books. But then this happens. You realize very quickly that real conversations and real language out in the real world are nothing like my textbook. I don't know enough words and phrases yet to fully follow the conversation. The way people speak in reality, it's not the same as the language that I'm taught. There's a huge difference in register between my textbook and regular chat. People talk in very different ways, especially if you're learning a language like Japanese, where you speak totally differently depending on who you're speaking to. So even though you want to go out and listen to real language, you run into these problems. You are faced with this completely different animal from everything that you've been learning in your textbook. So, what's the effect of all this? Well, you feel completely lost and overwhelmed with words that you don't know. You find that you're often still translating the previous sentence in your head instead of listening to the current one, which means you fall quickly behind. You get flustered and you lose track of the whole conversation. And it ends in this general feeling of, I'm not learning anything. This is very, very common when people go off and they start to try to learn by watching TV, reading books, listening to the radio. You just this general feeling like it's too hard. I'm overwhelmed with all this stuff that I don't know, and I feel like I'm not learning anything. And to make matters worse, even if you do find material that you really want to listen to, you can't find the transcript for it. Have you ever had this problem? Well, I know I have. I've been running into this problem for years now, and this is the reason for this, the existence of this whole series. So let's have a quick reality check and figure out what's going on here. So, movies, radio, books, real conversations, all of these things are created by native speakers for native speakers. Okay? It's the real thing. It's the real living, breathing language. Now, if you're still at an early or intermediate stage of learning, trying to break through that plateau and become a more confident listener so you can speak more fluently, take better parts, more fuller parts in conversations, all this stuff is simply too hard for you. There's too much of a gap between the real material, real authentic material, and where you are at. There are too many new words, it's too fast, there's lots of slang, you have different accents from different speakers. There are specific topics you've never heard anything about. We could summarize this by calling it stuff you never found in your textbook. Not to mention that none of this stuff that you really want to listen to and enjoy actually comes with the transcript, which means that even if you do want to push yourself and study with harder material so that you can listen out for all that important connected speech that we looked at in the last video so that you can understand real fast-paced speech, you end up spending more time with your head stuck in the dictionary than anything else. I think a lot of the confusion around this comes from the fact that people think that immersion is a good thing. But if you stop and think about this logically, there is a big gap between where you are and being a native speaker, able to handle native level things. It is logical that you're going to find listening to native speaker material hard. It's logical that it's nothing like your textbook. And so the solution to this is really quite obvious. You see, what you've been saying so far is, well, they speak too fast. I can't concentrate for long. I don't know these words. I panic and get frustrated. I spend too long translating in my head and fall behind. But all of this is just because you're stretching yourself just a bit too far. What about, instead, if you spent your time with material that's much closer to your current level, while still pushing you forward and challenging you a little bit? The reason that you find listening so hard is not because there's something wrong with you, although it might feel like it sometimes. It's because you're using material that you're simply not ready for. The real secret to improving your listening skills and learning languages in general is to spend your time with material that fits in this gap right here. It's where you're at right now, plus one, okay? Plus just a little bit beyond where you're currently at. It's what Dr. Stephen Krashen calls comprehensible input. It's input or material that's comprehensible. It's not too hard, but just right. Just a little bit beyond your current level so you're not overwhelmed or way out of your depth. And yet there are still new words to learn, grammar to master, and new accents to get used to, new slang to learn, things like that. It's just all made that little bit easier by being comprehensible, not impossibly hard. Finding the right material to listen to is so important that it makes all the difference between listening skills that improve quickly and reliably and an experience that results in frustration, stress, and low self-esteem. And I've seen this in my own learning so many times. If you start to make this shift and start to study with material that is comprehensible, your listening skills over the course of 90 days will transform beyond your wildest dreams. Again, in reality, it's much quicker than this, but assuming that you do it just a little bit regularly, over this period, your listening skills will, you will not recognize them by the end. So, here is my recipe for perfect listening practice. First of all, you need this comprehensible input. All right, you need to be using material that's just a little bit above your current level. It needs to be compelling, and this is so important. If you study with boring things you're not interested in, you won't learn anything, because that's not how we learn. You remember those classes at school where everything was, you just bored out of your mind? Well, you didn't learn very much, did you? But the stuff that you were interested in, you still remember it to this day. So the material that you use needs to be compelling. And the most compelling material on the whole is story-based stuff. You want to find out who done it. You want to find out what happened next. So material that comes in story format is extremely powerful, but whatever it is, it needs to be compelling, which means it needs to be something of great interest to you. It needs to contain natural spoken language. If you're going to get used to understanding native speakers, you need to be spending your time listening to native-like speech or very close to it. Remember in the last video we talked about connected speech, where you're getting used to the way that words transform, the pronunciation of words change in spoken language. Well, if you're not listening to that, you won't get used to that connected speech. You need to listen to a variety of accents and dialects, because they can be very, very different. Any language whatever language you're learning, there are accents and dialects which will make it sound almost like another language. And so if you don't listen, or if you're not exposed to those different accents and dialects, you won't get used to them either. It needs to be of a good length. And this is important because so much stuff that I find, sometimes you find listening material on the internet and it's like 20 seconds long or 30 seconds long, and it's not enough. You need to spend a long time listening to language for your ear to start getting used to the sounds of the language. And so generally something that's between 3 to 5 minutes is a good length, because it means you can listen to it and you can then go back and study it if you need to, and it's not too overwhelming. Lastly, of course, it needs to come with transcripts so that you can go back, you can look at the words you don't know, you can analyze what's going on. Every time you don't understand something you listen to, you can go back, you can check the source, and you can start to fill in all the gaps, as I keep saying, and gradually improving your knowledge of the language. Now, unfortunately, it is often really hard to find this kind of material in the real world. Most material designed for intermediate level has none of these features, or at most 1 or 2 of them. Most material is short, it's boring, it's on textbook topics like at the station or in the bank. It uses the fake classroom language that's been created specifically for this, for your level, but is nothing like the real thing because it's all watered down. So the best thing to do, usually the best option at this level, is to look for things like graded readers and short stories, which I've created a series of myself. These are usually one of your best options. However, these are normally in written language because they're books, right? So that's intentional. They are in written language that's fantastic for reading, but it doesn't give you the kind of exposure to real spoken language that you need in order to improve your listening for conversations. One good option, something that I've done many times myself, is to hire a teacher or another native speaker of the language to take things like YouTube videos that I really like and enjoy and to transcribe them so that I can watch the material that I enjoy in video and then actually read through the transcript so that I can do all these things that I've been talking about here in this series. The advantage of doing something like this is that it's very interesting. You select the material, it's compelling for you. The disadvantage is that often it's very, very hard. Again, there's too much stuff that you don't understand. You spend your time with your head buried in the dictionary. And it can also be very expensive if you're starting to pay people to transcribe a lot of audio. So those are a couple of good options for you, but one way or another, you need to look far and wide for this comprehensible, compelling input that comes with the transcripts you need, because that's the key to improving your listening, and that is how you get to a point where you can understand most of what's being said, you can take part in full conversations, and really start to live and love and enjoy the language for what it is. So in this series then, we've looked at listening from a number of different angles. We've started with the basic problem, which is that people talk too fast. But we saw there that actually that's what we perceive, but there are many, many different factors that go into us struggling to keep up. And then later we looked at 2 of those. So in video 2, we talked about the fact that, well, I can't tell words apart. They all kind of jumble into each other and they change, and I can't recognize the words that I've learned when a native speaker says them. And we looked at how the reason for that is something called connected speech. It's how words do change their pronunciation in fast speech, and that's a problem. And so the way around that is to listen a lot to natural material with the transcript so that you can see the written word and hear the spoken word, and that helps to show you where your ear is not strong enough and to start to fill in the gaps. But then the problem after that is that, well, I go and listen to that stuff, but I can't understand any of it because it's nothing like my textbook. And of course, the solution then is to find material that is comprehensible, just a little bit above your current level, so that you can actually understand it and enjoy it whilst learning new vocabulary and grammar and getting used to different accents and dialects at the same time. It's comprehensible input. It's that sweet spot right between where you are right now and +1, the next step forward for you. Of course, I know what you're thinking right now. Well, this is all great, Ollie, but where can I get this comprehensible input that I need? Well, I have been grappling with this for many years now, because on my podcast, one of the most common questions that I get is, well, Ollie, I've been through, I've been studying for a while now. I've got through the beginner stage. I'm kind of a post-beginner, elementary, maybe struggling at the intermediate level, and I'm really keen. I really want to put the work in and improve, so that I can get the level in my language, and particularly my listening skills, to a point where I can understand and enjoy it. But what do I do? And the advice that I give is, look, well, that's fantastic, but you need to find this right material. You need to listen to natural language that comes with the transcript, that is comprehensible and compelling, so that you can understand it, but also enjoy it and get exposure to real language at that right level. But of course, it is just so difficult to find this material. And so it got to a point well over a year ago now where I said, okay, well, enough is enough. This is a problem that I am having myself. It's a problem that tens of thousands of people who listen to the podcast and follow me on I Will Teach You a Language on my blog, they're having. We need to do something about this, because so many people out there have got such passion for learning and such passion for improving, but they're being held back by a systematic lack of this kind of material, this comprehensible input out there in the market. And so for well over a year now, I've been working tirelessly to create what I consider to be the perfect listening material across 6 different languages. It's called Conversations, and it is everything that I have tried to express here in this series. It's comprehensible input, so it's at the perfect level to push you towards the level of fluency, whilst not being quite as challenging and opaque as turning on the radio, for example. It's compelling story-based material. It takes place across 20. It's a complete story that takes place across 20 different parts. It's natural spoken language, so everything in this material is actually, it's a conversation. There's no narrative. It's all people speaking, so that you can spend all of your time listening to real dialogue in conversations. There's a variety of accents and dialects, so you get to hear people from different places and different accents speaking slightly differently. Every single part of the story is between 3 to 5 minutes long, so you get lots of time listening to the language. It's not too short, it's not too long, and of course it comes with that all-important transcript, so that you can not only do everything we've been talking about here in this series, reading along, learning about connected speech, checking your understanding, filling in the gaps, learning vocabulary, but it also comes with word lists so that you can easily look up any vocabulary that you don't know. I've put my heart and soul into this, and I'm really, really excited to be telling you about it. So look out for an email from me very, very soon with information about this. Thank you so much for listening to the series. I really hope you've enjoyed it and it's been interesting for you. And whether or not you decide to go further and investigate my new conversation series, hopefully what you take from this is the importance of finding that comprehensible, compelling material that excites you, pushes you forward, and gives you the tools that you need, which of course is the transcript, in order to improve your listening comprehension and start to enjoy the language more. Hey, it's Ollie again. This is back on the podcast now, so the class is finished. This whole thing of finding good material, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you will know just how much this has come up, just how big an issue it is. And really, the reason that I've spent the last year working on this conversations material is precisely because of you. You have left messages for me. You've asked me questions. You've interacted. You've given me you've told me about your struggles. You poured your heart out to me about what you are trying to do with your languages. And this material is for you. I would not have done it without you. Through your generosity of spirit, through your passion for languages, you have really helped to show me what it is that is holding people back, what it is that is making the difference between you being able to successfully learn a language and change your life in whatever way you want, or to become frustrated and dejected and maybe even give up. I wanted to thank you for all your support, again, for the podcast, and for all this time that you spent with me, even though we most likely have never met. This is for you, and I really hope you like it, and I really hope it makes an important contribution to your language learning. More details of this very, very soon.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT. And if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.